Welcome back. Today we're diving into Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey.
Edited by Amy Jacques Garvey.
Right. This book, it's like a direct line to Garvey's thoughts, speeches, writings.
Very raw, unfiltered.
Yeah, and he was, well, a complicated guy.
Absolutely. Powerful, definitely. But controversial, for sure.
So how do we even begin to unpack all this? His legacy, his impact, still so relevant today.
Well, maybe start at the source. Garvey said, "History is the landmark by which we are directed into the true course of life.
Okay.
What you do today that is worthwhile inspires others to act at some future time."
So he saw history as like a guidepost
Hmm.
or even a roadmap.
Exactly. But not just a passive thing. He thought we create history through action.
Ah, so it's active, not just looking back.
Right. And those actions, they can inspire future generations. He was all about controlling the narrative, for empowerment.
So he wasn't just documenting history, he was shaping it.
100%.
Yeah.
Showcasing Black achievement.
Yeah.
Trying to rewrite that narrative of Black inferiority, so common back then.
And that idea of his, right? A race without authority and power is a race without respect. Such a strong statement.
It cuts to the core of his philosophy. He linked this lack of power to fear.
He even said fear is a state of nervousness fit for children and not men.
Right. When man fears a creature like himself, he offends God, in whose image and likeness he is created.
Wow, that's deep. So fear isn't just weakness, it holds people back.
From reaching their potential, yeah.
And this is where it gets tricky because Garvey didn't shy away from calling out, well, what he saw as problems within the Black community itself.
He was sharp.
Yeah. Remember that line? The Negro who lives on the patronage of philanthropists is the most dangerous member of our society.
Ooh, that one.
Because he is willing to turn back the clock of progress when his benefactors ask him so to do.
He was super critical of Black leaders. He felt cared more about pleasing white benefactors than actually helping their own people.
He saw that as a betrayal, basically.
Right. And that question, it's still so relevant. When are leaders really for their communities? When are they serving someone else?
Totally. And all of this need for change connects to his big vision, right? A free Africa.
A redeemed Africa, yeah.
He wrote, "Wake up, Ethiopia. Wake up, Africa. Let us work towards the one glorious end of a free, redeemed, and mighty nation."
Let Africa be a bright star among the constellation of nations.
Powerful stuff. He really wanted an Africa that was strong enough to protect all Black people everywhere.
It was totally rooted in the reality of his time. Africa was mostly under colonial rule, resources exploited, people oppressed.
So a redeemed Africa wasn't just independence on paper. It was way more than that.
It was about restoring Black pride and power globally. That vision still inspires movements today,
For empowerment and self-governance.
But even back then, not everyone agreed with him, like his views on religion, for example.
Yeah, that was a whole other thing.
He said, "If the white man has the idea of a white God, let him worship his God as he desires. We, as Negroes, have found a new ideal. We shall worship him through the spectacles of Ethiopia."
A straight-up rejection of traditional Christianity as it was forced on Black people.
It was. He wasn't saying ditch faith entirely, but he wanted a spirituality that was truly Black.
Like create your own connection to the divine, based on your own history and culture.
Yes. Theological decolonization, some might call it. It still resonates today, with Black theologians and activists.
And then there's that controversial idea about using force.
Oh, that one.
He wrote, "The powers opposed to Negro progress will not be influenced in the slightest by mere verbal protests on our part. They realize only too well that protests of this kind contain nothing but the breath expended in making them."
A lot of people took that as him being pro-violence, but I think it's more complex than that.
So not necessarily armed revolution.
I think he was saying, look, those in power, they don't give it up easily. Just asking nicely won't cut it. He wanted Black people to build their own power.
Not just money or politics, but self-reliance, self-defense.
Exactly. Like, don't wait to be liberated. Liberate yourselves.
And it can mean different things, right?
Yeah.
Not always physical fighting.
Could be collective action, economic power, a truly unified movement.
That brings us to something kind of scary. His warning about Black people maybe being exterminated.
Oh, yeah. That was heavy.
He wrote, "The attitude of the white race is to subjugate, to exploit, and if necessary, exterminate the weaker peoples with whom they come in contact."
Can't just dismiss that as paranoia. Think about colonialism, the genocide of indigenous peoples. It's happened.
He was pointing to a pattern, like a warning, right? This could be us if we don't get organized and protect ourselves.
And while maybe full-on physical extermination seems unlikely to some, the idea of cultural or economic extermination, that's still a worry for marginalized communities.
It makes you think, for sure.
Definitely does. Makes you wonder, right? Was he really saying violence is the answer, or was it more about understanding how power works, even on a spiritual level?
Well, I mean, he did say some pretty intense stuff. Like, man is not satisfied or moved by prayers or petitions, but every man is moved by that power of authority, which forces him to do, even against his will.
Bold, right. Makes you think about some uncomfortable truths. I don't think he was saying, go be aggressive, but more like, this is how the world works, you gotta face it.
It's so different from someone like Dubois, you know?
Yeah.
Another big thinker fighting for equality, but through education, politics.
He even criticized Garvey for wanting separation.
Right. That whole integration versus separation debate.
It's a classic, honestly. Still goes on today.
Like, should black people focus on building their own thing, separate from white society? Or try to fit into what's already there?
Such a tough question.
Garvey was all about separation. He wanted black people to create their own nation, you know, their own destiny.
It's free from white control.
And it really caught on. Millions of people were inspired by him.
His impact was huge, no doubt. You see it in the Black Power movement, Afrocentrism, all kinds of things.
Yeah. Even people who didn't agree with his methods, they had to respect his influence.
Totally. He shifted the whole conversation about race.
Made the world pay attention to what black people were demanding.
Okay, I gotta ask about this one. It was interesting. What Garvey said about women.
Oh, yeah.
He wrote, what the night is to the day is woman to man. The period of change that brings us light out of darkness, darkness out of light, and semi-light out of darkness are like the changes we find in woman day by day.
Definitely could raise some eyebrows nowadays, huh?
Yeah, a little bit.
Sounds pretty traditional, doesn't it? Like old school views on gender roles.
And then he says, no real man can do without her. Like, whoa.
It's tough to read that now, right? A woman's only purpose being tied to a man. We've come a long way since then.
Absolutely. But we gotta remember when he was writing this, right? It was a different time.
Social views change, thankfully.
To be fair, he did talk about black women being strong, resilient.
He saw their role in the fight for liberation, compared them to biblical figures.
Deborah,
Esther, yeah.
So he saw them as crucial to the movement, not just on the sidelines,
leaders, yeah.
but still his views on womanhood overall, they're complicated.
A mix of respect and also like this essentialism that doesn't really fit anymore.
It shows you, even the most forward-thinking people, there's still products of their time.
Right. Their ideas can be flawed.
It's our job to read them critically, figure out what's still relevant and what's, well, outdated.
Okay, can we take a break from the serious stuff for a sec? I loved what Garvey said about love.
Go for it.
He wrote, a happy but miserable state in which man finds himself from time to time. Sometimes he believes he is happy by loving, then suddenly he finds how miserable he is.
Ooh, I like that one.
It is all joy, it sweetens life, but it does not last.
So true, isn't it?
That mix of happiness and misery all tangled up.
Classic.
And then he compares that, like human love, to God's love.
Which is constant, never-ending.
It's like a peek into his own spirituality, right?
Makes sense, finding peace in his faith.
Okay, back to the heavier topics.
Lead the way.
This one hit me hard. Garvey said, if you have no confidence in self, you are twice defeated in the race of life. With confidence, you have won even before you have started.
He's back to that self-reliance thing.
Yeah. You gotta believe in yourself.
Otherwise, you've already lost.
He thought that lack of confidence, it came from slavery, from colonialism, you know, centuries of being told you're less than.
And he wanted to break that cycle.
Give black people that pride, that belief that they could do anything.
Reclaiming that agency, refusing to be limited by other people's ideas about you.
Powerful stuff.
It really is.
And then he talks about ambition. Ambition is the desire to go forward and improve one's condition.
Okay.
It is a burning flame that lights up the life of the individual and makes him see himself in another state.
So ambition is good. It drives you forward.
But then he says, watch out for the divinely ambitious.
The ones who want power to rival God, yeah.
It's like ambition should have a higher purpose.
Not just about getting ahead in the world.
For Garvey, that purpose was always liberating his people.
Everything else came second to that.
No, this one's tough. His views on miscegenation.
Yeah, definitely a sensitive topic.
He was all about racial purity, saw interracial relationships as a threat.
Doesn't really line up with today's values, does it?
Not really. He wrote, some of the men of the Negro race aggravate the race question because they force the white man to conclude that to educate a black man, to give him opportunities, is but to fit him to be a competitor for the hand of his woman. Hence, the eternal race question.
You can hear the anxieties of the time, right? Interracial relationships were a huge taboo.
And there's this idea that each race has its own essence. They shouldn't mix.
But again, historical context matters.
Totally. This was the early 1900s. Integration wasn't really a thing.
He wasn't the only one with those views either.
Du Bois had similar concerns, right?
Yeah. So we can critique it, but we got to understand where it was coming from.
For Garvey, it was all about uplifting Black people.
Pushing back against that white supremacist idea that Blackness is inferior.
Like, we're beautiful the way we are. We don't need to be like white people to be worthy.
That message of self-love was huge.
Especially after centuries of racism.
Yeah, it was powerful.
Okay, let's talk religion.
Another Garvey specialty.
He said, religion is one's opinion and belief in some ethical truth.
Okay.
To be a Christian is to have the religion of Christ, and so to be a believer of Muhammad is to be a Mohammedan. But there are so many religions that every man seems to be a religion unto himself.
So it's personal, individual.
Yeah. And he wasn't afraid to call out the church, you know.
He was always challenging authority.
He said, if hell is what we are taught it is, then there will be more Christians there than days in all creation.
Ouch.
But even though he was critical, he still believed in faith,
Yeah.
right?
He saw it as a force for good.
Inspiring people to be better.
And especially important for the liberation of Black people.
And that's where worshiping God through the spectacles of Ethiopia comes in, right?
Exactly. He wanted to move away from that white European version of Christianity.
The one that was forced on Black people during slavery.
He wanted a spirituality that was truly Black, celebrating Black culture and history.
Like, you don't need the white man's interpretation of God. Find your own.
Yeah, find what empowers you. It's still relevant, even now. Finding your own way, your own connection to spirituality.
The kind that lifts you up, not holds you back.
Right. Using that power for good, for social change.
Speaking of which, I was struck by what Garvey said about government.
Oh, what'd he say?
He wrote, government is not infallible. Government is only an executive control, a centralized authority for the purpose of expressing the will of the people.
So it's a tool, basically.
Yeah, but one that can be misused, corrupted.
He always had that distrust of authority.
He even said, before you have a government, you must have the people. Without the people, there can be no government. The government must be, therefore, an expression of the will of the people.
So it's got to come from the people, not the other way around.
Exactly. And he felt strongly that Black people needed their own government.
To represent their own interests.
Protect themselves, make their own choices.
And that goes back to his vision of a free Africa.
Right? It wasn't just about having a homeland.
It was about having control, self-determination.
Yeah, being free from anyone else's rule.
That's a powerful idea, still inspires people today.
Before we wrap up, got to mention one more thing.
What's that?
Garvey's thoughts on education. He said, education is the medium by which a people are prepared for the creation of their own particular civilization and the advancement and glory of their own race.
So education as a path to liberation.
Exactly. Giving Black people the knowledge and skills to build their own future.
Not just going to school, though, right?
He meant something bigger.
Like cultural awareness, history, practical stuff.
Yeah, he wanted Black people to be well-rounded, able to handle anything.
And knowing your history was huge for him.
Understanding where you come from, the struggles and triumphs of your people.
It gives you a sense of purpose, right?
Totally. And I think that's important for everyone, not just Black people.
Knowing your past.
Helps you build a better future.
Absolutely. So where does all this leave us after this deep dive into Garvey's world?
Well, for me, that idea of self-reliance really sticks out.
Yeah.
Garvey believed Black people had to take charge of their own liberation.
Build their own institutions, create their own economic power, forge their own path.
He was all about Black pride, self-determination.
And he really got people fired up, you know? That movement he started, it's still shaving things today.
His ideas, sure, some of them were controversial, maybe even outdated now.
But he made people listen, forced them to confront the reality of injustice.
His impact is undeniable. Okay, one last quote for the road.
Okay, hit me.
Garvey said, "The world has now reached the stage when humanity is really at the parting of the ways. It is a question of man, mind thyself."
Wow, that's deep.
Makes you think, right?
What does it mean to mind yourself in today's world?
What challenges are we facing? What can we do to make things better?
Lots to ponder.
Definitely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Marcus Garvey. It's been real,